Navin Jones had been starved to death by his parents and only weighed 30 pounds when he was found unresponsive in his North Gale Avenue home on March 29, 2022. His body was covered with injuries including blunt force injuries to his face, front and back of his body, arms, and legs. Navin also had ligature marks on his wrists and waist where he had been tied up. His bedroom was furnished with only a dresser and a bed without sheets or blankets, and he had only one toy. The room also reeked of urine, and feces were found in his closet. The bedroom door had been tied shut so he couldn't get out, and a note on the door said not to feed or let him out. Let's get into it. When Navin Jones was born in December 2013, he came into a family already familiar with the Department of Children and Family Services. Navin's older half-brother Nigel died in 2007. The official cause of death was sudden infant death syndrome, but the Department of Children and Family Services found the baby might have been in an unsafe sleeping situation. Another older sibling to Navin was born prematurely in 2010 and was placed in foster care. He was returned to his parents, Stephanie Jones and Brandon Walker, 2 years later. When Navin was born in 2013, 3 years later, he tested positive for narcotics. The Department of Children and Family Services took custody of Navin and his brother at the time. They were placed in the care of Brandon's mother, Laura Walker, the children's paternal grandmother, who was granted legal guardianship in 2017. That placement did not end the calls to the Department of Children and Family Service hotline, which in 2017 received several reports regarding the family. One of those reports found that in December of 2017, Stephanie spanked Navin, then 4 years old, causing bruises to his butt. Then for nearly 4 years, things were quiet between the Department of Children and Family Services and the Jones-Walker family. In the summer of 2021, a family emergency in Florida caused the grandmother to return Navin and his brother to their parents so she could visit her sick mother. For weeks, the grandmother, who had legal custody, sought the children's return. For 6 months, Brandon and Stephanie played cat and mouse with the Department of Children, Family Services, and police, promising to return the children, making appointments with child protection workers, and not keeping them, not answering the door when a worker came by, and eventually fleeing the state with the children. Their grandmother returned from Florida in August just before school started and tried to get them back. On August 17, she went to the home and later reported that she had looked through the window of the home and saw trash, clutter, and old food throughout. She sent a text asking Stephanie to return the children, but she refused to return the children and ordered the children's grandmother off the property. The police were called, and the grandmother explained that she had legal guardian of both children. She also showed her guardianship papers. Stephanie told the grandmother that she would never see the children again and told the police that she had taken care of the older child for 2 years and Navin for the summer. She contended that the grandmother was angry and trying to exert her power. According to the report, the police officers told the grandmother the boys were fine and left. That night, the children stayed with Brandon and Stephanie. When Department of Children and Family Services returned to the house the next day to check on the children, there was no answer at the door. The next day, they returned again. Still no answer. Caseworkers checked at the local school. The children weren't even registered for school. The grandmother lived in Washington and Tazewell County. She went to her local police on August 19 and asked for their help. A police detective called Brandon, who agreed to return the children to his mother that night, but he did not. 2 days later, Brandon told Washington police that Stephanie had taken the children to Chicago and he would return them on August the 23rd, but he did not. August the 24th, the grandmother formalized her complaints and filed a missing persons report on the children, but Brandon told the detective that he did not care what the paperwork said. He was not returning the children. The next day, Washington police told the grandmother and the Department of Family and Children's Services that they had reason to believe the children were with Brandon and Stephanie in Florida. For about 6 weeks, the agency and police kept watch for the family in Illinois, but with no fresh leads into their whereabouts, it appeared that they had left the state. Brandon refused to give the police or the agency his address, but said that the family might return to Illinois in October for a doctor's appointment, and he would let them see the boys then. Meanwhile, the Department of Children and Family Services called the doctor's office. There was no appointment scheduled. On November the 4th, with the whereabouts of the children unknown to the grandmother, the Department of Family and Children's Services ordered police. The case was closed. The whereabouts of the children were unknown. The family resurfaced during an anonymous call to the Department of Family and Children's Services hotline on February 14th. The caller reported Navin and his older sibling were not going to school. The boys were dirty and Navin had 2 black eyes. While the older child went to work with his father, Navin was left with his mother during the day and occasionally locked into the basement so she could nap. Navin got in trouble for getting up in the middle of the night and eating chicken meant to feed the family dogs. On February 15, 2022, the caseworker said that she knocked on the door and did not get an answer, but she left her card. After the worker left, Brandon calls, says everything was fine. The family returned from Florida in January, and the children weren't in school because Brandon didn't have the paperwork to sign them up. He admitted that he took the older child to work with him, but the child enjoyed it. Brandon agreed to allow the caseworker to come and see the children on February 18th. In the meantime, another call came into the hotline. The caller said Brandon was there on the 15th when the caseworker came to the door, but would not let the caseworker inside to interview the children. That call prompted another visit to the home the next day, 2 days before the scheduled February 18th appointment. The child abuse investigators knock went unanswered. When the day of the appointment came, the investigator came to the door and knocked. No answer. The investigator called Brandon and he told him that the appointment had slipped his mind. He asked to reschedule on February 22nd, nearly 8 days after the original hotline call. During that scheduled appointment, Navin looked thin and sickly, but Brandon and Stephanie told the worker that Navin ate all the time but couldn't gain weight. The shelves were stocked with snacks, and the boys was eating popcorn during the interview. Both children denied any abuse. Both said they wanted to stay with their parents instead of returning to their grandmother. Brandon and Stephanie asked the investigator for help. They needed guardianship to get the kids into school and to take them to the doctor. The investigator agreed to help them get short-term guardianship. 2 weeks later, the caseworker spoke to the grandmother. She was frustrated that the children were not returned to her care. The investigator asked the grandmother to sign short-term guardianship paperwork. She complied with that request on March 14th. March 29, 2022, the 8-year-old boy who weighed 30 pounds when he died was found unresponsive. Stephanie had called 911 and said she had put him into a downstairs shower to revive him after she noticed he was not breathing.
Stephanie Jones's 911 call when she found her son Navin unconscious.
What's the address you need the ambulance at?
1717 North Gale.
But instead of immediately telling police what was wrong, she spent the first part of that urgent call blaming Navin's grandmother, who was his legal guardian at the time, for her son's alleged odd behavior.
My son, since I got him from his grandmother's after she threw him out, he's been doing a lot of really weird things, like drinking his own urine.
It took her nearly 1 minute to tell dispatchers that Navin was cold and lifeless.
What's happened today?
I went upstairs because I hadn't heard from him and found him unresponsive on the floor.
Is he breathing?
No.
But because of the parents' history with police and DCFS, officers didn't seem to buy it.
They have a history of not taking care of their kids or whatever.
And that wasn't the only problem police immediately pointed out.
Is there anything that looks suspicious at all?
The next day, Navin's parents were arrested on the charge of endangering the life of a child that resulted in a death. Navin's older brother was taken into protective custody and later placed with a foster parent. Stephanie and Brandon were indicted on 6 counts each of first-degree murder in connection with Navin's death. Stephanie pleads guilty to first-degree murder on December 7, 2023. She was not eligible for a natural life sentence as part of her plea deal. Her sentence could have ranged anywhere from 20 to 100 years. She was given 100 years and she has to serve 100% of her sentence. Brandon decides to go to trial, and trial started on December 10, 2023. During the trial, witnesses described Navin as looking like a cancer patient with hair. Another said he didn't look human. Judge John Vesper ruled that Walker's attorney, Gary Morris, could not enter the transcript of Stephanie Jones' guilty plea into evidence, saying that if she decided to withdraw her guilty plea within the 30-day limit of pleading guilty, she could face self-incrimination under the Fifth Amendment. Morris then asked if he would be allowed to inform the jury during closing arguments that Stephanie Jones did plead guilty to Navin's murder, but he also denied that request. Defense attorney Gary Morris spent 12 minutes on his closing argument, placing a majority of the blame on Navin's mother, Stephanie, and the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services. Are you responsible for the actions of your girlfriend? I think not. Are you even responsible for the actions of your spouse? I think not, Morris said. Brandon's defense centered around the claim that it was Stephanie who had abused Navin, and that Brandon spent most of his time at work and was unaware of what was going on. Brandon testified that he rarely went to his son's rooms and was not often there to feed them meals, citing his long work hours. But prosecutors showed text messages shared between Stephanie and Brandon to prove his knowledge of Navin's treatment. Morris also argued that Brandon was not responsible for Navin because he did not have a legal guardianship of the boy. But prosecutors countered that, saying a parent has a legal duty to protect and help a small child if the parent knows they're in danger. Prosecutors created a slide presentation of the pictures and testimonies from the entire trial, pointing out the inconsistencies between Brandon's testimony and the testimonies from other witnesses. Every day he gets up and he walks out of that house, he knows the condition Navin's in. He knows that there's strong probability of death or great bodily harm to Navin. Anyone with 2 eyes would know that, the prosecutor argued. So every time he gets up and walks out of that house, he consciously seeking to inflict pain and suffering on Navin. Laura Walker testified, saying she was contacted the day of Navin's death by the hospital to authorize them to start resuscitation efforts. He was in a body bag, but they had unzipped it enough for me to see his upper body. He didn't look human, Laura said. I touched his shoulder, but there was nothing there except the bone sticking out. I've never seen a human being that thin. He was like a skeleton. Laura, who was often emotional during her testimony, said that Navin lived a happy and normal life while he lived with her in Washington, Illinois. Prosecutors spent more than an hour on their closing arguments, telling jurors they presented enough evidence beyond a reasonable doubt that Brandon was the reason Navin Jones died on March 29, 2022. He didn't die of some rare disease. He didn't get shot. He didn't get hit by a bus. This guy, Brandon Walker right here, and Stephanie Jones murdered him. That's the word for what happened here, the prosecutor stated at the beginning of his closing arguments. 3 days of evidence and a deliberation that took less than an hour led to guilty verdicts. Brandon Walker was found guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder on December 15, 2023. My office, this jury, and our community have cared more for Navin in his death and his parents ever did in his life. Good riddance to them. Words from Peoria County State's Attorney Jody Hughes after jury found Brandon Walker guilty for first-degree murder in the death of his son, Navin Jones. He was sentenced to life in prison. Navin's death sparked renewed interest in the death of his half-brother Nigel, who died in 2007. A suspicious coroner decided to reinvestigate the baby's death. Nigel was 3 months old when his father found him unresponsive on a futon in their Washburn home. Stephanie was with the child when he became unresponsive. Nigel was pronounced dead at the St. Francis Medical Center. His death was found to be natural, caused by SIDS. But now advances in medical techniques can help investigators make more precise determination on the cause of death. The coroner has agreed to work with the Illinois State Police and the Peoria County State's Attorney Office to take a fresh look at the case. What confused me about this case is, why is it that the grandmother had legal guardianship, she had the paperwork, and the caseworker goes to her and asks her to sign over temporary guardianship so they can take the boys to the doctor and get them in school? That doesn't make sense to me. What is the reason why, when she went to the home, that caseworker did not have those kids removed? Instead of her contacting the grandma and having the grandma to sign temporary guardianship so they could do it, she should have took the kids that day and contacted grandma, and grandma could have took care of it. And she had also got the kids back. To me, the state just played and played and played around with these boys' lives. Navin did not have to die. And if they would have done their job, he would have still been here today. The system's got to do better. We got to do better in protecting our children. Alright guys, that is it for me. Thank you for sticking around to the end of this video. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. And take care of you. Talk to you next time.